Okay, now you got everything out. You got your cylinder, your piston, your head. Now the key is just start measuring everything with your calipers, and just I always get the spec sheet out and just start measuring everything, make a list of all the things that you need to replace or have machined. So I'll go start measuring and we'll make the list. I've taken everything out and used a pair of calipers and a bore gauge to determine what we needed to replace. So as I said before, get your specifications from your service manual. First thing I did is I measured the piston. The piston's got some scratch marks in it and it was slightly out of spec. So because it had the scratch marks, we went ahead and bought a new piston. So it's a standard piston, so it'll match the specifications that we need. At the same time, since I'm getting a new piston, I might as well get new rings. So these are the old ones. They're going to be replaced. The next thing that we measured was the head. We took the valves out. One thing I noticed that over on the side of the exhaust over here, it looked like there was some heat marks from either the gases coming up through the head gasket, what I think. And so the other thing too is the valve seals. They're really old and they've oversized, so I'm sure it was letting oil down through there. Next was we took the valves and measured the stem diameter, and the intake one is in good condition. The exhaust was a little bit undersized, so that's another reason it was probably letting oil down through the guide. And so we've got a new one that's in spec, and so we'll be replacing the exhaust valve. The next is we looked at the cylinder, used a bore gauge to determine if it was in spec, and it is. It did have a few slight scratches, and so what I've done is used a small hone and with some cutting oil we've honed that out, and I'm not going to show that today, but we've basically just put the new crosshatch in the cylinder, and so now we'll be able to assemble everything. So that's what we're going to be doing next. Before we go ahead and assemble, one of the things we need to do is we need to seat that valve, that exhaust valve, the new one. So we're going to show you how to do that. Okay, we're going to seat this the exhaust valve onto the head. So I use this water mix valve grinding compound. Put it around the edge of the valve seat. Go ahead and drop that down in there. And I put the head onto the cylinder just so the valve wouldn't, it was able to not interfere with the table. So you take your lapping tool, go ahead and push it down onto there, and then just go ahead and roll it back and forth. What you want to do is just keep doing that until you got a nice seat and you see that it's polished all the way around. Okay, we're going to go install the exhaust valve. So I've already got it started into there. You're going to need your valve spring compressing tool. First thing I'm going to do is turn it over, and then I'm going to take the brand new valve seal and I'm going to slide it down and snap that into place. Okay, then we're going to get this spring set, put it down on there, and then we're going to use the tool to compress that spring together and put the keepers in. I would recommend getting a a tool like this, it'll make things a lot easier to do that. So let me get it to the point where we're going to put the keepers in. Okay, I've compressed the spring. Now we're going to use and put the little keepers in there. I use a little pick to help get them in the right spot. So go ahead and work them down in there, and once they're in place, you back out the spring and it'll be set for you. Okay, one thing you can do to make sure that the keepers are seated properly is just take a rubber mallet and just tap the top of it and then check them to see, but usually they'll seat themselves when you do that. Alright, so now I've positioned the piston rings. I didn't show that on the video, but positioned the piston rings. I've slid the wrist pin through the connecting rod, and with some pliers you connect the clip on this side. Now one of the things you want to do before you start that is get some towels. I use some black duct tape right here to cover it all up, because the last thing you want to do is drop that clip down inside the motor. If you do, you're going to be taking the whole motor apart. So I've already put the wrist pin in and the clips, and so that's all ready to go. Now one thing is, you're supposed to stagger the piston rings 120 degrees. So go ahead and look at your service manual, get them in the right spot. One thing to note is on the piston it says in for intake. That needs to be on the intake side. So make sure you get that piston in there right. Okay, so I've gone ahead and taken the rags out, and what you want to do is clean the case the best you can before you put the gasket on. And then the cylinder, the other side, you want to get that real good and clean also. And then you put this base gasket on. Like I said, you'll want to check your service manual as to where the piston rings need to be positioned. But get them positioned. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put oil all around the piston in the cylinder. Then we're going to slide the cylinder down, and with your fingers you're going to pinch the piston rings, compress them down in so that you can slide the cylinder down. Okay, be sure to put your spacers that are on this side. Make sure you put that on. Then you go ahead and slide the cylinder down. Hold the piston, compress the rings with your fingers, and get it started. Just keep working on it till it slides on. Get the guides down at the bottom lined up. And just go ahead and push it down. Make sure that muffler's out of the way. Slide it down till it's sitting flush. Okay, we're going to prep the head so it can be ready to go on. First off, put these dowel pin sleeves in both sides. Let's put the rocker arm assembly on there. Put that bolt down in there. I put some blue thread locker on there, and so we're going to tighten that down and torque that to the specified limits. If you need to, look at your service manual to figure out what that needs to be torqued to. Okay, so we put the head gasket on, put the push rods in, got them positioned right. Now what you want to do is make sure that gasket's on and nice and flat. Make sure that the dowel pins are in place. There's one on this side and one over here. So once we have that in place, then we can go ahead and slide the head down on. Make sure your head gasket is in place and the dowel pins are sliding on, and make sure it's nice and flush and flat. Okay, so we're going to put the sealing washers on the head bolts. Okay, then what it recommends is you get some of the oil and put it on your rocker arms, put it on those sealing bolts. Just kind of get everything nice and wet with oil, and then we'll get ready to torque this down. What we're going to do is we're going to torque in a crisscross pattern from here to here, there to there. There's also two head bolts that are on this side. Go ahead and get them put in. They go straight down in here. And then we'll tighten them up after we do the head cap screws. So we're going to go in a crisscross fashion and do it in 2 steps. So we're going to take it to about half the torque that it's specified, and then we'll come back and do the final torque at the level that is specified. So check your service manual for what that needs to be. Okay, so then tighten the 2 head bolts over here to their specification. This one here that holds the rocker arm, make sure it's torqued also. Okay, next put the motor mount on through the rubber grommets, and then torque this bolt and the 2 bolts into the head to the torque that's specified. Next we'll put the boot for the carburetor on. So when you go to put this carburetor boot back on, make sure that you have the O-ring in place, and then just go ahead and tighten it down. Okay, so put that spark plug boot on there. Next we'll put the head cover on, or the valve cover on. Okay, we've got the valve cover gasket. We're going to put it down here. One thing we need to do is we need to get that gasket nice and wet with oil. So we're going to pour that around there and then get it nice and wet. Then we'll go ahead and put the cover on and put the bolts in and torque them down. So okay, so turn the motor over until you're at top dead center. You can check with the indicator, but if you can watch how the valves work, sometimes that's just as easy. Make sure it's top dead center, then we can adjust the clearance on the valves. Okay, before we put the valve cover back on, we're going to set the clearance on the valves. So go ahead, look up the specifications for the intake and the exhaust, and then go ahead and get them set.
tighten them down and pull it out. So do the same for the intake side, and then you're ready to put the valve cover back on. Okay, I reattached the muffler, got it all on there, torqued up, put the muffler back here, put the clamp back on, got the carburetor on, and so now I've hooked the gas up just kind of temporarily, so see if it'll start up before I do the final assembly. So let's try it out here. Okay, looks like got it so it works. So now we're just going to put all the plastic back on, get everything all back on, and we're done.